When a player dies in the middle of their playing days, it's always a tragic story. We assume that NFL players are the most athletic people in the country, and even in the world. No one is supposed to die in their 20s. That's way below life expectancy, and that's especially true for players who are super fit and in tip-top shape and have no underlying conditions. To hear a story about a player dying and having their NFL career end not by retiring or by being cut, but by being on their deathbed, unaware that they had taken their last breath, is absolutely scary, and a reminder on the fragility of life and how quickly it can be taken away from you. One day, you're an NFL player in your prime, thinking that your whole life is ahead of you, and the next day, you're dead. One day, fans are screaming and chanting your name, and the next day, they're crying and mourning. One day, coaches are game planning to have you play a big part in your offense, and the next day, the coaches have to move on. It's a situation that you never want to see happen, and it's a situation that absolutely stinks for all parties involved. But what about a situation where everyone thinks the player is dead, and sure enough, that player is still very much alive? And I'm not talking about a situation where the player is hospitalized and people don't know if he's going to make it or not, but he makes a recovery. I'm not talking about a situation like Damar Hamlin. I'm talking about a situation where people legitimately think he's dead, and upon hearing rumors of his death and hearing what happened, the player comes out and says, guys, I'm very much okay and very much alive. I'm not dead. Well, I bring that crazy scenario up because this player they are watching right now is Baltimore Colts wide receiver Jimmy Orr. In actuality, Orr died in 2020 and died at the age of 85, living a long and prosperous life where he was a fantastic receiver in the National Football League. But many people thought that he died at the young age of 26 years old in 1962, only for Orr to very much not be dead. And when you hear why people thought this, let's just say that this story will get incredibly confusing and incredibly bizarre. Because this is the story behind the NFL player who everyone thought died. Make sure you hit that like button down below, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single video that we post on the channel. Because we post every single day on here about the weird and the wacky history of the NFL with stories like this one that you've probably not heard of before. So if you like that sort of stuff, then this is the place for you. Thanks in advance for liking and subscribing and for helping this community grow. And with that in mind, let's talk about Jimmy Orr living to see another day. Before I talk about the incident in question, we need some context to understand just who Jimmy Orr is, and how good and how important he was as a player. Oddly enough, this is not the first video that I've done about Jimmy Orr, as I talked about him a while ago when it came to his bizarre retirement, when the Colts tried to get him to come out of retirement so that they could trade him to a different team, which is some way to treat a player if you ask me. You can learn more about that bizarre incident by clicking the card in the upper right corner, which you would think would be the most bizarre incident of Jimmy Orr's career. Alas, as you're about to find out, it was not. I don't think I'm spoiling anything when I say that Jimmy Orr was very much alive throughout this entire story, and he would eventually become one of the most successful and dominant receivers in NFL history by the time he retired after the 1970 season. He played a whopping 13 years in the NFL, which is impressive for anyone, let alone a wide receiver, and made it to 3 Pro Bowls while having 400 career receptions and just a hair under 8,000 yards to go along with 66 receiving touchdowns. I could go on and on about just how good Jimmy Orr was over his entire NFL career, but I did that in the video I did about him a few years ago, so I'll just do the Spark Notes version of it. Orr won AP Rookie of the Year honors in 1958 when he was with the Pittsburgh Steelers, starting his career with a bang, considering the fact that he was a 25th round pick when 9 of the other 11 players taken in that round didn't even so much as play a single snap in the NFL, and the other 2 guys played a combined 7 games. Orr had 3 seasons where he led the NFL in yards per catch, which made him the first player in NFL history to lead the league in this category on 3 separate occasions. And since then, he has only been joined by Stanley Morgan and Deshaun Jackson. When Orr was done playing, he was 3rd in Baltimore Colts history in receiving yards and 2nd in receiving touchdowns, with the only players ahead of him in those categories being Hall of Famers. Orr was 8th in the history of the NFL in receiving touchdowns at the time that he retired, and was 9th in receiving yards, with just about every player ahead of him after the 1970 season being in the Hall of Fame today. At minimum, the man is a Hall of Very Good receiver, and he was one of the best and most consistent receivers of the entire 1960s. But if we flash back a little bit, entering the 1962 season, Orr, in his 2nd season with the Colts, had a lot on his mind. Number one, he was coming off of the worst year of his career in just about every category. Despite playing 13 games, Orr didn't do much with the Colts. His 18 receptions was the lowest total of his career. His 357 receiving yards was the lowest total of his career. And his 4 receiving touchdowns was the lowest total of his career. Sure, there were some moments of brilliance, like his 105-yard outing against the San Francisco 49ers and his 2-touchdown outing against the Green Bay Packers. But for the most part, Jimmy Orr was extremely quiet and often injured, and needed to have a bounce-back year. But number 2, he had to complete some service time. Orr spent 2 weeks training with the National Guard and living in the mountains. This meant that for 2 weeks in June, especially with the way news traveled back in 1962, no one would hear a word about Orr, and no one would hear a word from Orr. He'd be off in the woods serving his country out in West Virginia, being one with nature with his National Guard unit. And that's when tragedy struck. Because right around this time, a young man lost his life. With so much in front of him, he was now gone. At 2:45 a.m. on the morning of June 29th, a 26-year-old with the last name Orr was involved in an accident outside of a Virginia establishment. While Orr was driving, an Army Reserve truck driven by Sergeant Joseph A. Steve Jr. collided with Orr's vehicle. Sergeant Steve Jr. was coming back from a 2-week training. The Army truck was carrying a 155mm howitzer, which is a 13,000-pound gun used during World War II. And the moment that Orr collided with the truck, Orr's car caught fire, and Orr was killed instantly. Jimmy Orr was 26 years old, was involved in something with the military, and was coming back from a 2-week training program in the Virginia area. So when people saw the last name Orr and saw that a 26-year-old died around the same location, just 15 minutes from where the Baltimore Colts were set to hold training camp in just a few weeks, and saw that he died after a mishap with a military vehicle, the news spread. Jimmy Orr, at the age of 26, was dead. The Baltimore Colts had lost their starting wide receiver, and a player had just lost his life in the prime of his career. Jimmy Orr would not have a chance of that bounce-back season, and training camp would start without him. Jimmy Orr was no longer with us. So as the Colts prepared for life without Orr, and fans and coaches were mourning the loss of their receiver that they just acquired last year from the Steelers, there was one person watching this unfold who was super confused by all of this. That person? That's right, Jimmy Orr. Because Jimmy Orr was very much alive and well. He was going to play in 1962, he was not dead, and he was perfectly fine. The man who died in the accident was a 26-year-old named Edward Orr. It was pure coincidence that both Edward and Jimmy were the same age and doing the same exact thing with military service and training with the National Guard around the Virginia area. Plus, it's not like Orr is that common of a last name. But Jimmy Orr heard what was happening and had to address the press and address the world by saying, "Wait a second, guys, I'm still alive." As Orr said in an article with the amazing headline, "Jimmy Orr's still around to prove he was not killed," which seems like something straight out of The Onion, I'm alive and all in one piece. Translation, I'm okay. I didn't die. That's not to say that Orr didn't have some issues with the training regimen with the National Guard in the West Virginia mountains. As he said, I'm not much of a woods liver. One morning, I woke up with a spider on my eye. He bit me, and my lid swelled up. So the bad news was that Jimmy Orr did get injured temporarily during this ordeal. He had a bad eye and the typical cuts and bruises that you get from being in the woods. The good news, though, was that Jimmy Orr did not die, nor did he even come close to dying. This was just a case of two people having the same uncommon last name and the same age doing the same thing, and a rumor spreading that never should have spread. And I'd be remiss if I didn't share some of the incredible headlines from this whole ordeal. Not sure if any of them possibly top the one from the Messenger Inquirer, as in the newspaper from Owensboro, Kentucky that I showed earlier, but here are some close contenders. The Hartford Courant had the incredible headline, Jimmy Orr solves auto accident confusion, says he is not dead. Yeah, that definitely clears up the confusion. I think saying that you're alive clears that up pretty freaking easily. This one from the Morning Union was written by the same guy who made the Wade Boggs is still very much alive joke from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, because the headline for this one reads, Orr of Colts still very much alive. This one from the Saginaw News took the Shaggy approach, with a headline simply saying, it wasn't me. How do you prove you're not dead? Just say it wasn't you. But she caught you passed out on the couch? She even got it on camera? Wasn't me, I guess. I love how the article right above it is about the Dallas Texans of the American Football League signing some washed-up quarterback named Len Dawson. Wonder whatever happened to him. And then, I have to appreciate the bluntness of this one from the Philadelphia Inquirer that seemed to imply that Jimmy Orr's life was more valuable than that of Edward Orr, as in the man who actually died, with the headline of one Orr killed, but not Jimmy. Good news, guys, the 26-year-old that knows how to catch a ball is still with us. I'm just glad he's alive, and it's not that 26-year-old scrub that doesn't know how to catch a ball. Like, there's gotta be a way to phrase that headline without seeming insensitive to the man who actually lost his life in this, right? However, it's a good thing that Jimmy Orr was not dead. Not just because it sucks when a healthy 26-year-old dies in a freak accident, but because he had an incredible 1962 season where he looked like one of the best receivers in football. He had so much more to give. After career-low totals in every category in 1961, he had career-high totals in every category in 1962, with a career-high 55 receptions for a career-high 974 yards and a career-high 11 touchdowns. You can see in all of these highlights just how good Jimmy Orr was over his career. His success was no fluke. In fact, he was so good in 1962 that he finished inside the top 8 of the entire NFL in each of those 3 categories. And he was a big reason why Johnny Unitas made the Pro Bowl and why the Colts had one of the top passing offenses in football that year. Jimmy Orr was nothing short of sensational in 1962 and went from presumed dead to one of the best players in the sport in the span of just a couple of weeks. Talk about an eventful year, if I do say so myself. I'd be very surprised if we see a situation like this unfold ever again. More than 60 years later, this seems like it's not going to happen today. Number one, news travels very differently today than it did in 1962. We have more access to the players than ever before, and you can access anything with a click of a button. Number two, sports are way more covered today than they were back in 1962. There are multiple stations running sports 24 hours of the day for 7 days a week, and there are hundreds of social media channels covering the news as it happens. There wouldn't be time for a rumor like this to develop and catch wildfire. And number three, with how much different times are, especially from the standpoint of how much players are getting paid and what's written into contracts, I can't see a player leaving society for 2 weeks being allowed to participate in a National Guard training program in the middle of the mountains. Either way, This was what the world was like back in 1962, when Jimmy Orr had to prove himself not just on the field with his performance, but off the field with his health, and quite literally prove that he was still alive. To live another 58 years after people presumed you were dead is pretty solid work. Because in 1962, Jimmy Orr was the center of attention for the Baltimore Colts, dead or alive. Check out our live streaming schedule for the next few days. We're live every single day on this channel, whether we're covering a sporting event or playing GeoGuessr or just taking your requests. So make sure you like and subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single time that we go live and so that you can join this community. Also, thanks to all our members and our Patreon supporters who get exclusive perks like their name of the end of each video, members-only Q&A streams, and cool emojis to use on videos and during streams. See how you can join this community and become a member or a Patreon member by clicking the link in the description below.